Friends, sci-fi, you want to watch super hit movie Poseidon in English? Then you must like this video. If you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Explain movie friends in today's video. The movie we're going to talk about is called Poseidon. I'm also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you'll get to watch this movie. This video is produced by Explain Movie. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, star-cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will give you a small review of the story of this film. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. So let's start the video. Poseidon is a 2006 American action disaster film directed and co-produced by Wolfgang Petersen. It is the third film adaptation of Paul Gallico's 1969 novel The Poseidon Adventure and a loose remake of the 1972 film. It stars Kurt Russell, Josh Lucas, and Richard Dreyfuss, with Emmy Rossum, Jacinda Barrett, Mike Vogel, Mia Maestro, Jimmy Bennett, and Andre Braugher in supporting roles. It was produced and distributed by Warner Bros. in association with Virtual Studios. It had a simultaneous release in IMAX format. It was released on May 12, 2006, and it was criticized for its lackluster script, but was praised for its visuals and was nominated at the 79th Academy Awards for Best Visual Effects. It grossed $181.7 million worldwide on a budget of $160 million. However, after the costs of promotion and distribution, Warner Bros. lost $70 to $80 million on the film, making it a box office bomb as a result. Plot: the Poseidon, a luxury cruise ship, is making a transatlantic crossing. Former New York City mayor and firefighter Robert Ramsey is traveling with his daughter Jennifer and her boyfriend Christian Sanders to New York, soon to be engaged. Also on board is former Navy submariner turned professional gambler Dylan Jones, architect Richard Nelson, Maggie James and her son Connor, stowaway Elena Morales, waiter Marco Valentine, singer Gloria, and Captain Michael Bradford. As the passengers are enjoying a New Year's Eve party, officers on the bridge see a huge rogue wave bearing down on the ship. To survive the wave, they try to steer the ship to starboard to take the wave bow first, but she does not turn fast enough. The wave swamps and capsizes the ship, killing the bridge officers along with most passengers and crew. In the ballroom, a badly injured Captain Bradford attempts to restore order and assures the surviving passengers that help is on the way and tries to persuade them to stay put. Unconvinced, Dylan leads Connor, Maggie, Robert, Richard, and Valentine as they make their way towards the bow, where he believes that they will have the best chance of escaping from the capsized ship. As they head up, they have to cross a lift shaft, as Richard and Valentine are attempting to reach the entertainment section. The bridge they are crossing falls, leading to Valentine hanging from Richard's leg. Dylan urges Richard to kick Valentine off to save his own life. Valentine falls and is fatally impaled on the protruding debris below. They reunite with Jennifer, Christian, Elena, and gambler Lucky Larry, who had all been in the nightclub of the ship, and who are the only survivors out of all of the occupants in the nightclub, who had all been electrocuted to death by mangled live wires. The group crosses the fallen lift shaft across the lobby, where Larry gets crushed by an AC chiller. The pressure from the water finally causes the ballroom windows to fail, breaking and drowning the occupants, including Captain Bradford and Gloria. With the water rising rapidly, the group escapes through a ventilation shaft and a couple ballast tanks, although Elena hits her head in an underwater passageway and drowns. With the ship slowly sinking, the survivors make their way to a crew lounge, where they find the bow section is flooded, until multiple explosions in the engine room floods the stern, lifting it out of the water. The group enters the bow thruster room and are horrified to find the thrusters still running, with their path blocked by the propellers, and knowing that the control room is submerged, Robert swims away to turn off the engine. He finds the shut-off switch to be broken, but presses the reverse button instead before drowning. With the propellers now spinning in the other direction, Dillon throws an acetylene tank into it, causing an explosion that destroys the propellers and leaving an opening for them to escape through. The group jumps out the thruster room and swims to a nearby inflatable raft, and as they are getting into the raft, the ship starts to sink. As they are paddling away, the waves push the raft farther away from the sinking ship. Poseidon flips back over, and across the water, the 6 survivors look on as she sinks stern first deep into the ocean. After the survivors fire a flare, 2 helicopters and several ships arrive to rescue them, having tracked the location of the Poseidon's GPS beacon. Cast: Josh Lucas as Dylan Jones, Kurt Russell as Robert Ramsey, Richard Dreyfuss as Richard Nelson, Emmy Rossum as Jennifer Ramsey, Jacinda Barrett as Maggie James, Mike Vogel as Christian Sanders,
Mia Maestro as Elena Morales,
Kevin Dillon as Lucky Larry, Freddie Rodriguez as Marco Valentine, Jimmy Bennett as Conor James, Fergie as Gloria, credited as Stacey Ferguson, Andre Brauger as Captain Bradford. Production on the film began in July 2005. Sets: as with the 1972 The Poseidon Adventure film, which based many of its sets on rooms aboard the RMS Queen Mary, the film's set designers drew inspiration for some of the spaces and the exterior aboard the fictional Poseidon from rooms aboard Queen Mary 2, most notably in Poseidon's ballroom, which is partly modeled from the dining room on Queen Mary 2. On the soundstage at Warner Bros. Studios, Burbank in California, 2 sets for each main room were built, one right side up and the other upside down. The upside-down ballroom was built on top of a large water tank in the soundstage so it could be flooded and drained in a matter of hours. The interior and exterior shots of the ship rolling were constructed with computer-generated imagery. Visual effects: the primary visual effects were completed by Industrial Light and Magic and Moving Picture Company. ILM used the most advanced version of Mental Ray to photorealistically light and render the shots, and was responsible for all of the ship's exterior shots. The most complicated work was the opening shot of the ship, where the camera tours the ship's exterior. It lasts for 2.5 minutes, and featured one of the most complex digital models ILM had ever created. For water simulations, proprietary software known as FizzBAM was used, created in collaboration with Stanford University. Harold Howie Weed was the film's computer graphics modeler. Digital interiors and water effects were created by MPC, while liquid and gaseous effects were simulated with Scanline VFX proprietary software Flowline. Other shots were done by CIS Hollywood, with water effects simulated using RealFlow. Soundtrack: the soundtrack was released on May 9, 2006, and includes music composed by Klaus Badelt, as well as songs performed by Fergie, who played the character Gloria in the film, and by Federico Aubel. Reception: box office. It grossed $22,155,000 on its opening weekend, for an average of $6,232 from 3,555 theaters, finishing in second place behind Mission Impossible 3. It eventually earned $60,674,807 in the United States and 120 foreign markets, for a total gross of $181,674,084. After all costs were factored in, Poseidon lost approximately $70–80 million for Warner Bros. Critical response: on the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, Poseidon has a score of 33% based on 204 reviews, with an average rating of 4.810. The consensus reads, "This remake of the Poseidon adventure delivers dazzling special effects. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that any of the budget was left over to devote to the script." On Metacritic, which assesses films on a score out of 100, Poseidon has a rating of 50 based on 36 reviews, indicating mixed or average reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave it an average grade B on an A+ to F scale. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times wrote, "Petersen's heart isn't in it. He is too wise a director to think this is first-rate material, and too good a director to turn it into enjoyable trash." Brian Lowry of Variety wrote, "Wolfgang Petersen's large-scale liner moves reasonably well, though anyone with the faintest memory of its 1972 predecessor will wonder where most of the plot went." and the dialogue is so stilted it can honestly be said the less the better. The film was also nominated for the Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Remake or Ripoff, losing to Little Man. However, it was commended for its realistic use of CGI in the capsizing scenes and nominated for the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, losing to Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Man's Chest. Home media. Poseidon was released to DVD on August 22, 2006, in both single-disc and double-disc editions, as well as full-screen and widescreen formats, and contains a behind-the-scenes featurette and the theatrical trailer. The 2-disc special edition expands on 2 bonus features and also includes the documentaries Poseidon, Upside Down, a unique set design chronicle, A Shipmate's Diary, which covers a film school intern's experience on the set, and a History Channel documentary which explores rogue waves. Domestic DVD sales for Poseidon were $27,196,038. An odd and unexpected word kept nudging its way into my mind as I sat watching Poseidon. That word was perfunctory. I hoped that other words would replace it. I knew I was not enjoying the movie, but I hoped it would improve or, lacking that, discover an interesting way to fail. But no, it was perfunctory, by which I mean, according to the dictionary that came with my computer, cursory, desultory, hurried, rapid, fleeting, token, casual, superficial, careless, half-hearted, sketchy, mechanical, automatic, routine, and offhand. Yes. And if you want to see the opposite of those qualities, consider some of the other films by the director Wolfgang Petersen, most notably Das Boot, 1981, but also In the Line of Fire, 1993, and The Perfect Storm, 2000. It may have been the latter movie that won him the assignment to remake The Poseidon Adventure, 1972. In The Perfect Storm, he shows a fishing boat trying to climb an overwhelming wall of water and failing. It is one of the best adventure movies of recent years, with vivid characters, convincing special effects, and a tangible feel for the relentless sea. Having made such considerable movies, Petersen does not seem to have been inspired by the opportunity to remake a movie that was not all that good to begin with. Everyone in his audience already knows the story, and much of the suspense depends on who gets the Shelley Winters role and has to hold his or her breath for a long time underwater. Poseidon follows, as it must, the formula for a disaster movie, which involves 1. A container holding a lot of characters, 2. Cameos to establish them in broad, simplistic strokes, 3. A catastrophe, 4. The struggle of the survivors, and 5. The loss of at least one character we hate and one character we like, and the survival of the others, while thousands of extras die unmourned. It might be interesting to add 6 deadly snakes on the loose, but they've all been signed up for the forthcoming Snakes on a Plane. The container can be an ocean liner, an airplane, a skyscraper, a Super Bowl stadium, whatever. Doesn't matter. This time it is an ocean liner, overturned by a rogue wave that leaves it floating upside down. The ship's captain, Andre Braugher, assures the passengers who were just celebrating New Year's Eve that they will be safe in the giant ballroom. A few daring souls think otherwise. They decide to save themselves by essentially escaping up the down staircase. These characters include the heroic Dylan Johns, Josh Lucas, the equally heroic Robert Ramsey, Kurt Russell, his daughter Jennifer, Emmy Rossum, the obnoxious Lucky Larry, Kevin Dillon, the suicidal Richard Nelson, Richard Dreyfuss, the mother Jacinda Barrett and her son Conor, Jimmy Bennett, and a stowaway, Mia Maestro. All of their human stories will play out against the drama of the endangered ship, as they say. What do I mean by perfunctory? I mean that Petersen's heart isn't in it. He is too wise a director to think this is first-rate material, and too good a director to turn it into enjoyable trash. We realize with a sinking heart that we will have to experience various stock situations, including 1, a perilous traverse over a dizzying drop, 2, an escape from seemingly locked rooms, 3, repeated threats of drowning and electrocution, 4, crucial decisions in which the right button will save them and the wrong one will doom them, and 5, ingenious reasoning by people who know nothing about ships but are expert at finding the charts, maps, and diagrams they can instantly decode. This is the ballast tank. The bulkheads are activated by water pressure. This is the way out. During all this time, exterior CGI shots will show the ship being rocked by enormous explosions, although curiously the lights come on from time to time when they are convenient, and the characters have all the flashlights they need to allow us to see the action. The characters also will all find time to sort out all the romantic complications, family differences, personal hang-ups, and character flaws that have been carefully introduced for this purpose. There is nothing wrong with the performances. All of the actors are professionals, although none have as much fun as Shelley Winters, who is the actor everyone remembers from the 1972 movie. They are wet a lot, desperate a lot, endangered a lot, and surrounded by a lot of special effects. Then some of them survive and others die. You don't know a thing at the end of the movie you didn't know at the beginning, in the proper hands. This could have been a sequel to Airplane, named Ocean Liner, in which once the characters battle their way to the top, i.e. bottom, of the overturned ship, a second wave flips it again, and they have to retrace their steps. Based on how Poseidon, the remake of the 1972 disaster film classic The Poseidon Adventure, is doing at the box office, I'd say that most people are going to agree with my review. I'll only touch briefly on the nausea that the creation of yet another movie remake brings to me, and here, once again with good reason. For those of you young uns, The Poseidon Adventure was released way back in 1972, and it was one in a string of very successful disaster-themed movies produced by Irwin. It starred Gene Hackman in his prime and a handful of other actors who were popular at the time, including Ernest Borgnine, Stella Stevens, and Shelley Winters. The plot was simple. Rogue wave flips ocean liner, and a small group of folks try to survive by making their way to the bottom, now top, of the ship, hoping to be rescued. So today we have Wolfgang Petersen's version of this same story. Now don't get me wrong, I've enjoyed his work in the past, with the exception of his most recent film prior to this, Troy. Here again, I have to say that this just was not very good. Sure, it had a few moments that were pretty suspenseful, but I almost attribute that to the personal phobia that I brought to this viewing, fear of drowning. Any suspense was not related to the characters specifically, since I really didn't care much what happened to them. Wolfgang Petersen also did The Perfect Storm, which I rather enjoyed, so one might think that another sea-related flick might be right up his alley and turn out rather well. Unfortunately, this was not the case, with a movie that had characters that were not very fleshed out and that I really didn't care about. And call it personal bias, but having the non-standard sexual orientation of one of the characters featured so prominently and in my face didn't set well with me either. I also found it amusing that other 2006 twists to the characters included substituting a single mom and her son for the older sister and younger brother from the original, and an ex-Navy professional poker player for the conflicted priest of the 72 version. The only character that connected at all was Robert Ramsey, played by Kurt Russell, as the ex-firefighter and mayor of New York City. Russell always manages to bring something comfortable to a performance, whether he's playing Snake Plissken or a redneck. The other thing that bugged me about the film was how brutal it came across in terms of the deaths of the passengers. For a PG-13 film, I found it kind of disturbing, both in regards to the dead bodies and the portrayals of people being killed. They really could have dialed it down a notch or two and not lost anything, in my opinion. As I stated above, there were some gut-cruncher moments in the film, but again, it wasn't related to any fondness for any particular character. The original version, although perhaps pretty hokey by today's standards, managed to make me care a lot more about each character, and their deaths evoked a lot more sadness than here, where my thought was, oh well, one more dead guy/gal. Even with the famous scene from the original, whereas our intrepid gang has just climbed out of the ballroom and the flood starts coming in, I felt something for those who didn't make it. Here, the way the film was edited, we followed our escapees for about 10 or 15 minutes, forgetting about the ballroom folks, when abruptly we're taken back there just in time to see them all killed. Not nearly as effective as in the first film, where Hackman was looking down at them all with a sense of helplessness because there just wasn't anything he could do. One scene I did find particularly effective was when one of the characters drowns in an effort to save the others. From what I've read elsewhere, it was probably the most realistic and disturbing portrayal of drowning I've ever seen. That one stuck with me for a while. At the end, I didn't feel any sense of elation for those rescued, although they seemed to be pretty darned happy about it and didn't seem to give any thought to those that were left behind or that sacrificed themselves so they might live. This is a giant FX-driven retread of the Poseidon adventure from 1972, about the ocean liner that is hit by a freak wave and completely capsizes, leaving passengers no choice but to clamber up from the ceiling of the wrecked stateroom, the chandelier now a shrunken mound of cracked baubles, up to the exposed hull. It was an unsinkably entertaining film that triggered the 1970s craze for those spectacular disaster movies produced by Irwin Allen, such as The Towering Inferno, Earthquake, and The Swarm, which addressed the worrying issue of killer bees. Spielberg's Jaws siphoned off a little of this enthusiasm itself. But the new Poseidon, directed by Wolfgang Petersen of Das Boot fame, is too cool to go in for the out-and-out corniness and the multifarious and heartfelt character drama that made those movies so lovable. It also, incidentally, does not feature the ensemble casting of aging Hollywood stars that was de rigueur for the 70s disaster movie, with a row of their faces in boxes along the bottom of the poster. Our hero is Josh Lucas, a star who once played bad guys and is now repositioning himself, less plausibly, as an action romantic lead. He plays the professional gambler in the ship casino who proves to have a heart of gold by leading a small group of stout-hearted adventurers, including former fireman Kurt Russell, up to safety in the face of pleas from the captain to remain where they are until help arrives. In the original film, the ethnic subdivision was Jewish, typified by the gutsy and likable performance from Shelley Winters. Now this group has been replaced by Latinos. Mia Maestro plays the feisty stowaway, and Freddie Rodriguez from 6 Feet Under is the waiter whose plot function is to provide knowledge of the ship's layout. I am sorry to say that Poseidon revives the dishonorable tradition of creating one token black in a notionally important job, ship's captain. There is also a gay man with a single diamond earring, played by Richard Dreyfuss, the one folk memory link back to the 70s glory days. He has been dumped by his partner and is on the verge of throwing himself overboard when he sees the big wave coming towards him and changes his mind about suicide. I wanted to see much more of this kind of big, brassy, sentimental flourish. So where's the beef? The original Poseidon had a strident, unapologetic message. When disaster strikes, do we strike out for freedom like bold risk-takers and entrepreneurs, or sit back and wait for the authorities to do something? That was a real argument the first time around. Not now. It would slow up the all-important action. Kurt Russell's job is to be overprotective of his daughter, played by the glassy-eyed Emmy Rossum, and there are some very yucky lines in which he disapproves of her burgeoning womanly sexuality. "Do that top button up," he says, taking offense at her décolletage. "You mean the twins?" taunts Emmy. It's the kind of dialogue that leaves no toe uncurled. The big set pieces are impressive, but there are some outrageously unconvincing moments from the hundreds of tuxed extras who must run around panicking. When the big wave first strikes, they do a lot of hammy Amdram bumping into the shattered furniture, almost shouting "rhubarb, rhubarb" at each other. Their faces are eloquent of people who aren't quite up to the job of emoting. It will be a minor treat to rent the DVD and freeze frame some of the more choice wooden expressions. It's time to look at the remake to the original Poseidon film. It's a pretty faithful remake, although it does take its own twists and turns. The basic plot and resolution are unchanged, but the movie takes some liberties with the characters. I'm always up for that, since a word-for-word remake doesn't have a whole lot of point, if you ask me. We've already seen it once, so throw in a few wrinkles if you're going to do it again. The film starts off with all of the characters getting on the Poseidon boat. They are looking forward to a nice relaxing cruise. All of the characters are here for different reasons. Some are literally along for the ride, while others are here for the excitement. One guy even came here to die. Well, all of their plans go haywire when the boar is struck by a powerful wave and goes upside down. While most of the people on the ship decide to stay in the lobby since the pilot thinks they'll be okay, Dylan has other ideas. He aims to get off the boat right away by going to the bottom, which is now on top. Robert decides to follow him because his daughter is trapped in one of the rooms up ahead. There are two main plots here, since half of the main characters are trapped and the others are trying to get to him. With ensemble casts, the main thing the film has to get right at all costs is making the characters good. Fortunately, this one is able to pull that off. I won't say that I liked all of the characters, but it was definitely a strong cast. We also get a good amount of time to each plot, and the film manages to keep up the tension the whole way through. The length is basically perfect, as it doesn't end too soon nor does it drag on. I dare say that the writing may have even been better than the originals. I definitely did enjoy it more than the first, although it is pretty close. I just think this one was able to take advantage of the modern effects more, which really helps for a local disaster film like this one. Seeing the wave hit the ship is just handled really well. In general, the rooms of the ship all look very realistic and the explosions are handled well. You can tell that no expense was spared on this film. I'm also glad that nobody randomly brought a pet on board, as that would have hurt the immersion. The film also doesn't really dwell on the violent scenes here. There are a ton of fatalities, of course, since almost everyone dies. But while you see the bodies and such, it is never too gruesome. The film focuses on the story and getting the characters through this. Robert is the main character, if you ask me, although it's meant to be pretty debatable. He's a solid lead, and I was definitely on his side with the Jennifer debates. While he might prefer to take the cautious route, he definitely does whatever it takes to find her once Jennifer goes missing. Robert's a very intelligent character who makes the right moves and is a natural leader. Without him, the group would have definitely been in trouble. Then you've got Dylan, who is the other side of the coin. He's quick to think of plans and is physically able to get things done that the other characters would not be able to do. Robert's the one who convinces the others to jump on board while Dylan thinks of the plans first. He is able to look at everything objectively, and Dylan was definitely my favorite character. His character was just handled perfectly. From the side characters, Jennifer and Christian were definitely a lot weaker than the others. It was pretty insensitive of them to be constantly flirting when Robert was just trying to get a few days to relax. Jennifer was also wearing rather risque attire just to mess with him. Well, in her defense, it seems like she was oblivious, but considering how quickly it happens after the last scene, it's hard to take seriously. Christian doesn't really get anything to do. It is pretty impressive that he was able to swim so well after being pinned under a bunch of debris for so long, though. Richard is the old man of the group, and he came close to jumping overboard near the beginning. This disaster helps him learn to keep on fighting, but what may hurt how much you like him as a character is when he sends someone else off to their doom. Keep in mind that Dylan was encouraging him, but ultimately Richard is the one who made the choice to kick the guy off. Since that chef was the one who suggested Richard go first, it was a really big betrayal. He never saved himself from that. Elena started out real good, but started sinking later on. Elena snuck on board the ship, but is one of the first to try and help once Christian is pinned down. She seemed like a really nice character and definitely was a good supporting one, although she also had a tendency to get scared a lot and did nearly cause the team to die on several occasions. Maggie is solid as well, but is more consistent and does a good job of hanging in there even while her son is constantly messing up. Connor is definitely pretty terrible, IMO, but the kids rarely end up ranking for me. They just hold everyone back, and running out on everyone near the climax was extremely foolish. Then you've got Lucky Larry, who I guess was a slight homage to the Texan from the first film. Either way, Larry looks really bad here. He just shows up to taunt the heroes quite a lot and then dies as soon as you would expect. If anything, he's just here for some grim humor, although I'd say he was handled well. There's almost no way you'll like the character, but that's basically the point. He's no hero, and he's not going to get any noteworthy scenes. He's just here to cause trouble and slow everyone down. Overall, Poseidon is definitely a fun film. It's the kind of fast-paced disaster film that really holds up well. There's a lot of replay value here since the scenes don't drag and something is always happening. Even from a pure visual perspective, I'm sure there is a lot here to rewatch. If you haven't seen this film yet, then I recommend checking it out. As long as you like a good action title or just enjoy a solid ensemble film, then you'll like this one. Naturally, it's the kind of film where not everyone survives, so you can also try and make some predictions on who will make it. Irwin Allen would be proud. Poseidon is a throwback, a 1970s-style disaster film made with 2006-era special effects. The movie delivers in most of the ways that matter for a motion picture of this ilk, with Poseidon never trying to be something it isn't. It's about a group of two-dimensional humans battling bad luck and Mother Nature in a sea-based disaster that makes Titanic look like a pleasure cruise. There's enough uncertainty about who's going to live and who's going to die to maintain a bit of suspense until the end, although it's more a question of mild curiosity than having a vested interest. One smart move by director Wolfgang Petersen and his screenwriter Mark Protosevich is not to attempt to develop the protagonists. Each character in this film represents a tried-and-true disaster film stereotype, from the self-absorbed loner who finds redemption in helping others to the kid who doesn't listen to his mother. The film opens with a few brief scenes that equate each character with their respective type. We are not subjected to the too often obligatory character-building sequences that serve little purpose beyond expanding the running length and providing unintentional humor. See Armageddon, Deep Impact, The Core, etc. The film is more a reimagining than a direct remake of the 1972 feature, The Poseidon Adventure. Although the premise and basic setup are the same, the characters and their specific situations are new. That means no Gene Hackman or Shelley Winters. After a 150-foot-high rogue wave capsizes the Poseidon during a New Year's cruise, a group of survivors struggles to escape from the ship before it sinks. The group is comprised of professional gambler Dylan Johns, Josh Lucas, ex-fireman and ex-mayor of New York City Robert Ramsey, Kurt Russell, single mother Maggie James, Lucinda Barrett, and her son Conor, Jimmy Bennett, Ramsey's daughter Jennifer, Emmy Rossum, and her fiancé Christian, Mike Vogel, depressed businessman Richard Nelson, Richard Dreyfuss, and stowaway Elena, Mia Maestro. Leaving the safety of the upside-down grand ballroom, where most of the survivors huddle behind bulkheads waiting for rescue. These men and women face fire, water, and other perils in their struggle to take control of their own destinies. When one considers a disaster flick, there are two aspects of the production that come under scrutiny. The first, how spectacular is that actual disaster? The second, how many surprises are there in the body count, and are the action scenes leading to the deaths convincing and exciting? Although Poseidon doesn't get top grades on either count, it does a respectable job in both areas. Some of the victims and survivors are evident from the start, but one or two aren't obvious. No director in his right mind would kill a kid or a dog in a disaster film. There are no dogs here, but there is a kid. The biggest special effects moment in the film occurs about 20 minutes in, when the huge wave blocks out the moon and horizon before crashing into the ship, tilting it over before turning it belly up. We have seen more impressive disaster spectacles, but this one is good enough to be convincing. It's too bad that not all the effects work in the film is this effective. Wolfgang Petersen is no stranger to thrillers at sea. He helmed both Das Boot and A Perfect Storm. In this case, his cast has to face not only water but fire, as explosions rock different parts of the ship. One can tell from watching Poseidon that this was a physically demanding shoot for the actors. If stunt doubles are used, they're not evident, and many of the most daring feats appear to have been done using a life-size soundstage rather than through the magic of CGI. That often gives Poseidon a more organic, less high-tech feel. In the wake of Titanic, there's probably a temptation to turn a sea disaster picture like Poseidon into an epic romance adventure. It's a temptation that Petersen thankfully resists. Poseidon is devoid of anything that might conjure up memories of the Winslet-DiCaprio coupling. Its straightforward action-adventure approach is both a strength and a weakness. Petersen sets out to give us a group of undeveloped stock characters and a bunch of cheap thrills, and that's what he delivers. If that's the kind of thing you want from a would-be summer blockbuster, Poseidon will not disappoint. Didn't see you there. I was just sitting by the fireplace enjoying a pipe and warm brandy, remarking on the 3 years since High Def Digest's recommended HD DVD review of Poseidon. Finally, for the desperate and downtrodden, or the non-purple at heart, the wait is over to get your own shiny copy of Poseidon on Blu-ray. But friend, is it worth it? Truth be told, if you're a fan of the movie, what I write doesn't matter a lick. If you own the HD DVD, know this is not an upgrade in quality or special features. And for those wondering if they should see it for the first time, no, it's not as thrilling or fun as 2012. Read on for some of the reasons why. Disaster movies are hit or miss. At one end of the spectrum, we have an array of everyday people in an extraordinary situation. Man against nature, heart-in-your-throat tension, and a plucky group of survivors banding together. On the other end, we have nacho cheese-flavored melodrama, half-dimensional caricatures, and the latest whiz-bangery of visual and special effects. Like many others, Poseidon falls into the latter category. An adventure tale of a New Year's Eve where a 150-foot rogue wave rolls a cruise liner, killing all but a handful of character archetypes. The young couple with a disapproving former mayor of New York father, the suicidal gay wine connoisseur, the ex-Navy submarine specialist turned card shark, the Spanish stowaway, the Spanish busboy, Kevin Dillon, and the precocious kid with a mom who, for some reason, knows the ship's useless captain. You know, people just like you and me, who show zero symptoms of hypothermia despite swimming all night in rising northern Atlantic Ocean water. But don't worry about them. 15 minutes is all that's set aside for said characters in our disaster epic, so when the world turns upside down, it's really hard to care. And if the audience doesn't care, doesn't sympathize, doesn't imagine themselves in that situation, well, all pun-filled joking aside, a film sinks, which Poseidon does for the vast majority of its running time, both literally and analytically. A damn shame, considering Wolfgang Petersen is used to be one of my favorite directors. I recently sprinted to Best Buy to pick up The Never-Ending Story. I own 2 different versions of Das Boot. P.S. Dear Sony, Das Boot, Blu-ray, get on it. And who doesn't love watching President Ford telling terrorists to get off his plane? But then came The Perfect Storm, which worked well enough until a cartoon wave came along and made Mark Wahlberg say goodbye to his wife in a vision. Say what? And Troy. Wait, so it's supposed to be real, not all mythological, but Achilles still gets dropped by an arrow in the heel? Sigh. The rough streak continues here because of similar problems. A propensity to think that technology is more important than character, and a violation of one's own rules. Technology is on the hook from shot 1, which is 2.5 minutes long, according to Petersen, the longest CGI single shot in history, circa 2006, of course, sweeping around the majestic cruise ship Poseidon. Sadly, it doesn't look real. And why are we taking a tour of the boat's exterior, a location we never see again? Couldn't this opening shot have been more like Panic Room, where David Fincher smartly used swooping CGI-enhanced camera movements to give viewers a tour of the story's important geography, so that the audience had its bearings? So perhaps they would know how far into and along the course of the character's journey they were? Nope. We have exposition for that. As for rule violations, there are plenty. Richard Dreyfuss is suicidal, then, spoiler, sacrifices the busboy to save his own life. Josh Lucas is better off working alone, then becomes the leader of the survivors 13 seconds later. And in a scene where everyone's trying to cross the lobby, which has become a flaming pool of rising death, Josh Lucas dives into the flames. Wait, the same flames they're afraid of falling into? Yes, just go with it. Swims under them and climbs up the other side, so those remaining can slide across a hose. Wait, if the flames don't hurt people, why don't they just dive, swim, and climb too? Shut up. Logic. No one asked you. And those are just a few examples. If you watch this movie, turn off the logic section of your brain, or at least pour yourself a drink. It's not hard to imagine why the movie failed. In the special features, the filmmakers even go out of their way to boast about how the movie was in pre-production before a script was ever written. Why? They had a release date to meet. But wait, is this movie any fun? Actually, yes. Complaints aside, let's give credit where credit is due. First, there are at least 2 white-knuckle sequences for those such as myself who shiver simply thinking of heights and or confined spaces, crossing an elevator shaft and climbing through air vents. Sure, both have been done before, but so has the entire movie, a few times actually. Still, these 2 sequences are well put together and tense. Next, hats off to all the craftsmen and craftswomen who worked countless hours behind the scenes to make this movie look spectacular. The sets are stunning. This is old-school movie-making, remaking at its almost finest. Costumes, makeup, sound design, lighting, live-action special effects, aka the effects shot in camera on real locations. Wow. With a little more time to let the opening breathe, with some more effort to logic, not letting people swim for minutes underwater, Poseidon could have been one hell of a ride. Plot. After a huge tidal wave capsizes a luxury liner in the North Atlantic, individual survivors, Josh Lucas, Kurt Russell, Jacinda Barrett, band together and traverse a hazardous upside-down maze that they hope will take them to safety. As the wrecked vessel fills with water, the survivors must call on hidden strengths and skills to face the fight of their lives. Believe it or not, I had never bothered to watch Poseidon until this past weekend. I always loved the Poseidon Adventure, starring Gene Hackman, so I didn't see the point in this remake. I'm glad I did eventually sit down and give it a chance, as it's a fun disaster movie with a decent cast that includes the always reliable Kurt Russell, as well as Josh Lucas, Richard Dreyfuss, and Emmy Rossum. Poseidon is directed by Wolfgang Petersen, who I consider rather underrated, as he also helmed classic films like Das Boot, In the Line of Fire, The Never-Ending Story, and even Air Force One, which I find a guilty pleasure. He knows how to do a set piece, and Poseidon isn't short of spectacle. It's around 98 minutes long, so it doesn't get too bogged down with silly things like characterization or realistic dialogue. It gives us the usual cardboard cutouts who we tick off until they meet their eventual unpleasant demises. However, I did find I liked the cast and wanted them to survive, which is rare in these kinds of movies. The only character you are made to hate is Kevin Dillon's jerkish Lucky Larry, who isn't quite as fortunate as he thinks he is, but the rest of the cast are surprisingly sympathetic. The capsizing sequence is for the most part impressively done, and manages to create a suitably hellish scenario where our band of survivors try to make it to the bottom of the ship, which is now the top, and find safety. Not everyone will make it, of course, and spoiler alert, it bothered me greatly that Kurt Russell had to sacrifice himself for the greater good, but it was a hero's death. It was very well done, and I don't know how they actually made it look so convincing, as it was genuinely upsetting to watch. I thought the meanest death was poor Valentine, who falls and gets impaled, which he really didn't deserve, but it certainly guarantees you are emotionally engaged. The kid Coner, Jimmy Bennett, was quite the hero, but I still don't understand how he ended up separated from his mother in that stupid cage. There is some CG, especially the explosions, but the effects mostly hold up, and I've seen a lot worse. The pacing keeps things relatively tense, and the ventilation shaft scene is the stuff of nightmares. It's tough to sit through, as it's one of the most desperate moments of the film. Overall, Poseidon may not reinvent the disaster genre, but it's a fun ride with several harrowing moments and regular explosions. The cast do their best with the rather one-note characters, but they are at least mostly sympathetic, and Kurt Russell automatically makes any movie better. A film about a big boat without the big boat, Poseidon is what happens when computer technology is allowed to replace good filmmaking. While the thrills are there, a lot of what happens in Poseidon is hopelessly contrived, and the few external shots are entirely manufactured from bits and bytes. Aboard the luxury cruise ship Poseidon, carrying thousands of passengers, professional gambler Dylan Johns, Josh Lucas, meets New York's former mayor Robert Ramsey, Kurt Russell, a retired firefighter. Also on the grand boat as New Year's Eve approaches are Robert's daughter Jennifer, Emmy Rossum, and her boyfriend Christian, Mike Vogel, the gay Richard Nelson, Richard Dreyfuss, who was recently dumped by his partner, stowaway Elena, Mia Maestro, and single mother Maggie, Jacinda Barrett, and her son Connor, Jimmy Bennett. As the midnight celebrations die down, a giant rogue wave strikes the Poseidon, killing hundreds and turning the boat upside down in the water. The main banquet hall holds a giant air pocket, and that is where most of the survivors are urged to stay. But a small group led by Dylan and Robert correctly believe the air pocket to be a death trap and decide to venture upwards towards the bottom of the ship, now the only part that is above the water. They have to navigate numerous dangers to try and make it. A questionable remake of 1972's The Poseidon Adventure, Poseidon is unfortunately not much more than an elaborate and mostly claustrophobic obstacle course, with the cast members shepherded along from one physical challenge to the next like mice in an upside-down maze. Director Wolfgang Petersen is a master of squeezing tension out of confined, wet spaces, and Poseidon completes his trilogy of peril in the water movies that started with Das Boot, 1981, and continued with The Perfect Storm, 2000. The perils of Poseidon are undeniably exciting and well executed, and Petersen keeps tightening the tension screws with ever more creative puzzles that need to be solved for the survivors to make progress on their desperate journey through the bowels of the stricken boat. But precious little time is allowed for any true human emotion to develop or connections to grow. The opening few minutes of the movie are almost as ridiculously scripted as the weekly guest star introductions on the Love Boat television series, and all that is revealed about the main characters is crammed into a few stiff scenes. Once the boat is upside down, the survivors stick to strictly predefined boundaries of behavior, and eventually fade into the insignificant background behind the heartbreaking glory of a ship dying a slow death on its back. Destroyed grandeur, explosions, fire, floods, large falling obstacles, and floating dead bodies dominate the visual experience, and all the actors may as well be extras. Josh Lucas gets it quickly and displays all the depth of an anonymous extra, trying but failing miserably to channel a Matthew McConaughey-type persona. Kurt Russell and Richard Dreyfuss add some talent, but generally appear to be wondering how they ended up playing second fiddle to a rack of computers. Jacinda Barrett, Emmy Rossum, and Mia Maestro are largely wasted among the hardware, software, and flood of masculinity required to lead the survivors to safety. The stripped-down title of the disaster epic formerly known as The Poseidon Adventure accurately reflects the movie itself, an early summer vehicle that's built for speed, with scant time to develop characters before the world turns upside down. Thanks to its simple construction, Wolfgang Petersen's large-scale liner moves reasonably well, though anyone with the faintest memory of its 1972 predecessor will wonder where most of the plot went, and the dialogue is so stilted it can honestly be said the less the better. Given that, Warner Bros. Should enjoy a few bright mornings after, though prospects of an extended theatrical voyage appear unlikely. Petersen came to prominence directing another seafaring tale, Das Boot, but beyond the waves the two films are polar opposites, one exploring human nature under claustrophobic conditions, the other basically using its actors as props in a video game-style ascent to survival. It's equally telling that when the producers started from scratch with an all-new screenplay and original contemporary characters, as Petersen explains in the production notes, the demography of that hardy band changed considerably. And while Richard Dreyfuss plays a gay architect, which can be seen as a nod to a new century, there's no room anymore for Shelley Winter's fat old Mrs. Rosen. Instead, the three central females, Jacinda Barrett, Emmy Rossum, and Mia Maestro, all look pretty fabulous when wet. Written by Protosevich, Poseidon dispenses with its exposition in the first 20 minutes, and even then, as sparingly as possible. Dylan, Josh Lucas, is a ne'er-do-well gambler, first seen in a high-stakes poker game opposite Robert Kurt Russell, who is, for no particular reason, the former mayor of New York. Robert is traveling with his headstrong daughter, Rossum, and her boyfriend, Mike Vogel, a relationship Robert isn't thrilled about. Dylan, meanwhile, engages in a brief flirtation with a single mom, Barrett, who has brought along her young son, whereas Elena Maestro has stowed away, having lacked the passage for a trip to see her ailing brother in New York. That's about as much as the audience learns before the wave hits, leaving the special effects, in essence, as the star of the story. And while there are some impressive, harrowing sequences as passengers get picked off by an almost biblical parade of threats, the initial impact of that great rogue wave is over in a matter of moments, and some of the imagery is too conspicuously computer-generated, diminishing its impact. As the aspiring Moses attempting to lead his people to the Promised Land, minus the priestly vestments cloaked on Gene Hackman, Lucas cuts a dashing figure, and the male bonding between him and Russell brings almost the only sparks that fly character-wise. At least Dreyfuss's efforts to assist Alias co-star Maestro are perfectly chaste in this telling, as opposed to Red Buttons dragging a well-soaked Carol Lindley along behind him. From a practical standpoint, the movie's truncated running time will doubtless come as a pleasant surprise to some, not only allowing theaters to squeeze in extra showings, but sparing teens the ordeal of sitting through mushy emotion before things start blowing up. And despite the liberties taken, this version is preferable to Hallmark's recent made-for-TV update, which absurdly revised the story so that terrorists triggered a blast that tipped the boat over. Indeed, after a spate of overly long blockbusters from Petersen, including Troy, just the fact that he brings one home in less than 100 minutes represents an interesting twist. Still, even if the goal was to test whether audiences will warm to a disaster yarn that barely bothers to identify its victims, Poseidon goes a little overboard. A real-life cruise ship captain breaks down Kurt Russell's 2006 disaster movie, a remake of the 1972 classic The Poseidon Adventure. Poseidon placed an all-star cast in mortal danger aboard a capsized ocean liner, delivering old-fashioned disaster movie vibes using modern-day computer-generated special effects. Critics unfortunately trashed the movie, as evidenced by its 33% Rotten Tomatoes score, and it was not a big hit at the box office either, grossing just $181 million worldwide on a reported budget of $160 million. Poseidon not only failed to impress critics and audiences, it also did not impress a cruise ship expert who recently broke down the film in terms of realism. In a video piece for Insider, real-life ship captain Wendy Williams discussed the Russell-led disaster epic, taking the film to task for certain inaccuracies, including its use of overdramatic explosions. Williams also panned the movie's depiction of how cruise ship crews handle emergencies, knocking the film's fictional crew for creating panic among passengers. The original 1972 Poseidon Adventure is no cinematic masterpiece, but it was a big hit in its day, grossing $84 million domestically, $502 million if adjusted for inflation, while nabbing a surprising 7 Oscar nominations alongside a Special Achievement Oscar for visual effects. A key entry in the disaster film craze of the 1970s, the movie stands alongside other classics of the era like Airport and The Towering Inferno as a schlocky but fun watch, filled with overwrought 70s spectacle and loads of big stars placed in very uncomfortable situations. 2006's Poseidon attempted to keep key aspects of that classic disaster movie approach, including the all-star cast, while bringing to bear ILM-created computer effects. The addition of state-of-the-art CGI did not ultimately improve the formula, however, as Wolfgang Petersen's film failed to conjure even the mild thrills delivered by the lower-tech original. CGI certainly did not help the remake achieve greater realism than the original film, at least according to one expert, who believes the overdone Hollywood aspects of the 2006 movie canceled out any sense of accuracy it might have been striving for. Wolfgang Petersen's Poseidon recognizes and encourages belief in the popular popcorn movie theory of the survival of the whitest. 20 whole minutes shorter than Ronald Neam's trash classic The Poseidon Adventure, the film's short attention span is apt to this era. The only surprise here is that the hole left behind by Shelley Winters wasn't filled by at least one anorexic Nicole Richie type. This may be a deliberate ploy on the part of the filmmakers. Move the story so fast and stupidly that it will convey the sense that it has nothing on its mind, making critics appear snobbish for wanting to grapple with it. For sure, the film doesn't think very much. But that's only because Petersen's latest travesty insults us on an unconscious level. And there's no shame in calling out his dumb as shit Aryan fantasy for rewriting Back of the Bus as bottom of the ship. For those who care, spoilers ahead. The essential problem with the film isn't its inadequately dramatized story, artless CGI. The last shot suggests Land of the Lost's opening credit sequence. MacGyver-like acts of ingenuity, or banal death scenes performed by stunt people who obviously can't act. Those are givens for a film of this kind, but how it latently and dangerously advances the notion that the will to survive is a white person's province. The filmmakers understand how people are integrated along racial and economic lines within a luxe setting. The only black, Latino, and Asian characters in the film work on the lower levels of the Poseidon, which are the first parts to go kabloom when the ship is capsized by a tsunami referred to, in summer blockbuster terms, as a rouge wave by the Uncle Tom captain who goes down with the ship, his arms around a black-eyed pea. There's truth here, but Petersen and screenwriter Mark Protosevich only scratch its simplified surface before then stomping on it. Through Mia Maestro's character, Elena Gonzalez, we get a rare illustration of passing in action. Because she is light-skinned, she infiltrates the rich white part of the ship with ease and joins the film's motley crew of would-be survivors that includes a suicidal gay man, Richard Nelson, Richard Dreyfuss, sporting a diamond stud in his right ear, who kills, in order to save his ass, the waiter, Marco Valentin, Freddie Rodriguez, who snuck her onto the New York-bound vessel. When Richard, oblivious to her connection to Marco, tries to save Elena late in the film, the moment suggests some minstrel variety show between the film's others that whites and straights weren't invited to. Does Petersen think minority groups communicate telepathically? Elena's scam, though, only gets her so far. By the time the group needs to negotiate a tightly screwed vent, the woman's legit fear has been condescendingly associated with her Christianity. When she provides her new friends with the crucifix they use as a makeshift screwdriver, she becomes instantly disposable. Never have I seen a film where people have tried less to bring someone back to life using CPR. When Richard gets a turn, he doesn't even try to revive her. Instead, he weepily kisses her. Only a fool or a blind person would ignore this subtext, which might have been daring if it felt less inadvertent, or if Petersen had deployed it differently, as a critique of the racist Hollywood hegemony he bows to. By the time Josh Lucas and his privileged company emerge from the topsy-turvy Poseidon, you expect to see the words "they were expendable" scrawled across its hull. Back in the 70s and 80s, we had a series of movies like Earthquake, Airport, and Towering Inferno, which set the benchmark for disaster thrillers, full of screaming deaths, frantic struggles through collapsing structures, and desperate acts of heroism. Amongst these were the Poseidon movies. The first, The Poseidon Adventure, starring Gene Hackman and Ernest Borgnine, was a gripping thriller. Its sequel, the Michael Caine effort Beyond the Poseidon, was not quite as good. Ever since the advent of CGI and its vast expanse over the years, disaster movies have come back with a bang. From War of the Worlds to Armageddon to The Day After Tomorrow. Now we return to the Poseidon for a remake with the added benefit of post-2000 special effects. But is it actually any good? A huge cruise ship packed full of holidaying passengers. A tsunami-esque tidal wave. A recipe for disaster. Luckily, we have an ex-Navy man, an ex-fireman, a ship architect, and a few screaming women and kids on board, determined to forge their way off this oceanic tomb before the rising water catches them. Poseidon follows the survivors of the capsizing of this titanic ship as they forge their way across fiery ravines, up crushed air vents, and through collapsing elevator shafts, even battling the flood from the ship's sinking. Once the movie gets going, i.e. once the wave hits, the frantic escape action does not let up until the final few seconds. It is what you might call a non-stop adrenaline-fueled disaster adventure. The characters are pretty much all heroic. Any more dubious souls get picked off fairly early on, with Kurt Russell's ex-mayor and ex-fireman father desperately trying to get his daughter and future son-in-law off the sinking wreck, and Josh Lucas's ex-sailor knowing enough about ships to get them going in the right direction. Russell does start the movie looking a little bit old, but once he gets his hands dirty, you feel like this may just be an older extension of his character from Backdraft and start to rejoice in his recent return to the big screen. Josh Lucas is quite underrated as an action hero, having avoided the cruise route by playing some very different characters in his career, but his performances in Stealth and now in Poseidon certainly show that he can hold his own in this role. Even Richard Dreyfuss, Jaws, and Kevin Dillon, Platoon, get reasonable supporting roles. Unfortunately, when it comes to the female characters, we seem to have dropped back to the 70s and 80s. This movie is in the style of a classic pre-feminism actioner, where all the men do the heroic stuff and all the women are good for is screaming, panicking, getting stuck, freezing in the face of disaster, and needing rescuing. Whether it be the stowaway, played by alias regular Mia Maestro, who's claustrophobic, the young mother, Jacinda Barrett, Ladder 49, who's trying to take care of her son, or Kurt Russell's character's own daughter, played by the lovely Emmy Rossum, who should be familiar with disasters, having starred in The Day After Tomorrow, they each get their turn, being saved by one or more of their male counterparts. Only the cameo from Black Eyed Peas singer Stacey Ferguson, where she holds on to the ship's Captain Andre Braugher from Homicide, displays any kind of female dignity or strength. It doesn't ruin this movie. In fact, you can quite easily put it to the back of your head and slot this movie into the same shelf as Towering Inferno or the original Poseidon thriller in terms of style. But it was a niggling thing in my head and something that I thought Hollywood had grown out of. All in all, it is a thoroughly enjoyable movie. It's never going to be classic like the others I've mentioned, but it has all the markings of a decent disaster romp, with not too much focus on the effects, which are used well because you seldom notice the CGI, and plenty of drama and tense situations. If you need a movie that will be distracting but not particularly demanding on the brain, this will no doubt rock your boat. On its final voyage across the ocean before it is decommissioned, the luxury liner Poseidon is struck by a tsunami that capsizes the vessel. With much of the crew and passengers dead, a small group of survivors led by firebrand preacher Scott Gene Hackman attempt to climb up through the ship to safety. Let's talk about the dilemma of reviewing non-contemporary films. There's always an underlying struggle when coming to a famous movie decades after it was released. Social attitudes change and evolve for one thing, and something that may have seemed uncontroversial then might be considered offensive now. It is also very easy to learn the stereotypes and cliches of a genre before seeing the film that included them in the first place. Basically, anybody watching Casablanca in the past half-century or so is going to be distracted from knowing dozens of lines of dialogue in advance. It creates a dilemma because if you're a critic or reviewer, you need to decide how to read the old movie and how to address the consequences of age. I recently reviewed the 1955 Western, The Indian Fighter, which has a very progressive and sympathetic treatment of Native Americans, but then casts all of the Sioux characters with white actors. For a 21st century viewer, it can be taken either way. It is easy to claim historical context to forgive all manner of faults, but such context works both ways. The movie may be from 1955, but the audience is in 2023. I'm sure many modern viewers will blanch at the brown-faced performances and understandably recoil from many old westerns, and honestly, who can blame them? When it comes to the Poseidon adventure, The problem is not so much social attitudes as genre conventions. When released in 1972, it was likely pretty sensational stuff. A cross-section of society is traveling on an ocean liner and when disaster strikes must band together and cooperate to find a way to survive. The ensemble is packed with impressive actors and their characters are readily developed during the film's first act in broad, readily identifiable strokes. When the tsunami strikes, it is an excuse for eye-popping visual spectacle and shocking mass carnage. When the survivors make their attempt to escape, it is through a series of commando course-style challenges and ordeals, all with a rising body count. While Poseidon was preceded by 1970's Airport, which shared a producer in Irwin, it really did set up a formula for disaster films that continues today. So what is there in the Poseidon adventure for the viewer of 2023 who may have already seen The Towering Inferno 1974, or Earthquake 1974, The Hindenburg 1975, Speed 1994, Daylight 1996, Dante's Peak, Titanic both 1997, Deep Impact 1998, The Day After Tomorrow 2004, and Deepwater Horizon 2016. What is there for the viewer that, heaven help them, first encountered the stereotypes in Airplane Flying High 1980? After all, both films do feature a deadpan Leslie Nielsen. There are quite a few things, it turns out. More than anything, there is charm. There is a pleasing physicality to the picture, which relies on upside-down sets and models to create a surprisingly convincing upside-down Poseidon. There is a wonderful old-fashioned kind of acting from veterans like Red Buttons and Ernest Borgnine that contrasts against the more nuanced performance of star Gene Hackman. Most of all, there is a sense of integrity. The film has an earnest quality that really allows a modern viewer to overlook the predictable narrative and seemingly stock characters. For viewers really able to take films in their historical context, this is a properly great action thriller. For everybody else, there is honest comedic appeal, since the film had exerted so great an influence over the ensuing decades that nothing occurs that is a surprise. Its predictability makes it funny. I think it is okay to view a movie in this manner too. Time may rob it of its dramatic impact, but it has gained a new capacity to entertain, as any fan of Mystery Science Theater 3000 will tell you. Something that has aged wonderfully in the film is its strong treatment of masculinity and a fairly aggressive middle finger to organized religion. There is a contrast between how the film's male leads react to their predicament. Hackman's Reverend Scott is a hard-driven man. He believes God helps those who help themselves and takes on an immediate leadership role as a result. By contrast, Borgnine's Mike Rogo, a police officer, is packed with a competitive streak and misplaced rage. He is propelled to constantly prove his maleness and challenges and fights with Scott at every opportunity. As the quiet and slightly effete bachelor James Martin, Red Buttons feels rather coded as gay, with all of the cultural assumptions of the time that brings, and yet as the film develops he proves as physical and muscular in helping others survive as Scott does. At no point does he feel compelled to change personality or bearing. There is something small but resonant in that. The religious aspects also fascinate. The film features two priests. One valiantly tries to lead the survivors to safety. The other waits with those unwilling to try and ministers to them. That one dies quite rapidly when the upturned ship begins to sink. As for Scott, his religion seems to end by the film's climax, where he rails furiously against God for the senseless loss of life. The film's ultimate message seems to be that faith is worthless unless it is paired with deeds. For a popcorn disaster flick, that seems quite deep. In the end, the Poseidon adventure proves a great example of the difference between criticism and review. When reviewed for the benefit of 21st century moviegoers, this is a rather silly but sweet disaster flick with a lot of camp appeal. When critiqued to better understand cinema, this really is a mold-breaking masterwork. It boasts action, tragedy, dramatic themes, and social commentary. It had a palpable influence on popular cinema, in particular during the 1990s. It is a masterpiece of its day for sure, but it is also a historical relic. Which reading are you going to pick? Who is the actor? Everyone remembers from the 1972 movie. They are wet a lot, desperate, a lot endangered, a lot, and surrounded by a lot of special effects. Then some of them survive and others die. You don't know a thing at the end of the movie you didn't know at the beginning. In the proper hands. This could have been a sequel to Airplane named Ocean Liner, in which once the characters battle their way to the top, i.e. bottom, of the overturned ship, a second wave flips it again, and they have to retrace their steps. Poseidon is upside down on the 15th minute of the film, and that includes a 2.5-minute credit sequence, which was at the time of release the longest single-shot effect sequence to have been made for film to date. Robert is on a cruise with his daughter Jen and her boyfriend Chris, incredibly protective of her and mistrusting of Christian intentions. Robert is as subtle as an old-school 1950s father Jen, and Chris are on tentor. Hooks because they are newly engaged but aren't sure when will be the best time to tell them. Robert, an ex-mayor, decides to let off steam by playing poker on New Year's Eve alongside Lucky Larry. You know, he won't last long with that name. And Dylan. Dylan is a professional gambler who also has a charm and an eye for the ladies, that is, until he bumps into Maggie, who gives us good as she gets on the flirting scale. She is on the cruise with her young son Connor, who has a PSP, so I automatically approve of him. Then, without warning, a rogue wave hits the ship and turns it almost 360 degrees over before it rolls back to being capsized. Explosions rip through the ship, and carnage is widespread when the rogue wave hits the SS Poseidon just after the new year chimes in. Robert, Dylan, Maggie, Connor, and the recently dumped architect Nelson are all trapped in the dining room, with the captain and singer Gloria Nelson was busy about to jump off the boat as a lawn man when he spotted the rogue wave and came to his senses. Meanwhile, 2 floors below them, which is now above the dining room, Larry, Jen, and Chris were in the disco when the ship turned over. Chris is trapped under some lighting equipment, and Jen enlists the help of Elena to get him free. Elena had stowed away on the ship to see her sick brother. The captain wants everyone to stay put, but Dylan doesn't fancy his chances. What he wasn't expecting was for Maggie, Connor, and Nelson to come along for the ride. Robert then joins the group on the condition that they go to the disco to rescue Jen and Chris on the way to rescue Dylan, then enlists the help of Valentine, the ship's waiter, with whom Elena was hiding with, to be Dylan's map to get them through the carnage as team. Dining room make it toward Team Disco. The captain, Gloria, and the rest of the dinner party stay behind to wait for help. The problem for all 3 groups, this ESP Poseidon is dying, ripping itself apart, buckling under pressure, and then drowning under its own weight. Will anyone make it to the propellers to make a bid for freedom, and will rescue arrive in time? I think people who will come into Poseidon with the preconception that the movie will have a similar tone to the original will be sorely disappointed. You need to almost rinse the original from your mind. Mia Maestro tugs at the heartstrings, but not in the same way. Shirley Winters will the blossoming romance Maggie and Dylan is sweet but modernized and not as pristine as Nani and Mr. Martin. There is no sea element to the remake, and the heart, while they're in the background, has been torn out and stamped on. This is a mean film, and therefore will not satisfy anyone waiting for a Linda Rogo put-down, instead under the expert guide of Wolfgang Petersen and the effects team's Poseidon relishes in throwing the cast into real sets full of water and fire, whilst green screen and CGI was used. The film was largely made from practical effects, and it shows the cast shield from the heat of the fire and look genuinely worried when it bellows near the water is real, and watching the cast swimming around, gasping for breath, and struggle across the sets of carnage makes the movie gritty, particularly in the first 2/3 of the movie. There's a lot of really good camera cuts that show short 1 or 2 seconds of various characters reacting to what's going on around them. It makes the film feel fast-paced and fluid, and I really enjoyed this way of cutting across the different challenges the survivors face. You can also see that the cast did their own stunts too, as it's a hugely physical movie, and the camera shots you get show the actors doing the things in both wide and close-up. I really appreciate all the effort involved. Sadly, where the film does lack is in the characterization and story beats. Wolfgang said after he finished that the film that was released was missing at least 20 minutes of character-driven scenes that would have fleshed out the characters depending on when and how they would have been placed in the film. I think that this could have only benefited, did the film no end. Some characters barely get any screen time, and so it is more difficult to care for them if you are less invested. That being said, one of the film's strengths is also its relentless assault of problems thrown at the survivors. So if the character arcs weren't evolving as they were escaping, maybe it would have slowed the film down. The opening credits was at the time the longest continuous CGI effect produced. Sadly, you can also tell it's CGI, even though it is impressive. Everything's a bit too clean. Aside from that, however, the effects are absolutely stunning. The capsizing has people flying everywhere, as does the flooding of the dining room. It looks impressive as it's full of real water and stunt actors. As the actors all appear to do their own stunts too, swimming, jumping, running around fire, and being swept away. It enabled Poseidon to make the most of stunning wide shots and gritty close-ups. There is no need for wobbly cameras to distract you when you have the real thing happening on set. The sets were all made to tilt and be submerged into water. That means the water is genuinely pouring in everywhere. And that is why the actors aren't acting. They are reacting. Lucky Larry aside, the cast are on the whole quite likable, and that helps the movie speed along the Robert. Jen and Chris' storyline shines all of them in decent lights and takes a somewhat predictable but gruesome end. Nelson is gay, but in a great piece of underlayment, which is now a word is barely mentioned, nor made a light to, except for a somewhat symbolic moment in an elevator shaft with Valentine Elena, is the Latino mashup of Nani and Belle from the original, and whilst Maggie is reduced to shouting Connor a lot, they are both given moments to shine. The character who really carries the whole thing is Dylan, though Josh Lucas puts in a fantastic performance, as he, just like Reverend Scott in the original, slowly, his escape plan, his gambit of emotions across the whole film are captivating. Other information about this film based on how Poseidon, the remake of the 1972 disaster film classic The Poseidon Adventure, is doing at the box office. I'd say that most people are going to agree. With my review, I'll only touch briefly on the nausea that the creation of yet another movie remake brings to me. And here once again, with good reason for those of you why Yoon. The Poseidon Adventure was released way back in 1972, and it was one in a string of very successful disaster-themed movies produced by Irwin Allen. It starred Gene Hackman in his prime, and a handful of other actors who were popular at the time, including Ernest Barrine, Stella Stevens, and Shelley Winters. The plot was simple. Rogue wave flips ocean liner, and a small group of folks try to survive by making their way to the bottom, now top of the ship, hoping to be rescued. So, today we have Wolfgang Petersen's version of this same story. Now, don't get me wrong, I've enjoyed his work in the past, with the exception of his most recent film prior to this, Troy, here. Again, I have to say that this just was not very good. Sure, it had a few moments that were pretty suspenseful, but I almost attribute that to the personal phobia that I brought to this viewing. Fear of drowning. Any suspense was not related to the characters specifically, since I really didn't care much what happened to them. Well, Wolfgang Petersen also did The Perfect Storm, which I rather enjoyed, so one might think that another Sear-related flick might be right up his alley and turn out rather well. Unfortunately, this was not the case. With a movie that had characters that were not very fleshed out and that I really didn't care about, and call it personal bias, but having the non-standard sexual orientation of one of the characters featured so prominently and in my face didn't set well with me either. I also found it amusing that other 2006 twists to the Characters included substituting a single mom and her son for the older sister and younger brother from the original, and an ex-Navy professional poker player for the conflicted priest of the 72 version. The only character that connected at all was Robert Ramsey, played by Kurt Russell, as the XF firefighter and mayor of New York City. Russell always manages to bring something comfortable to a performance, whether he's playing Snake Plissken or a redneck. The other thing that bugged me about the film was how brutal it came across in terms of the deaths of the dead bodies and the portrayals of people being killed. They really could have dialed it down a notch or two and not lost anything. In my opinion, as I stated above, there were some gut-cruncher moments in the film, but again, it wasn't related to any fondness for any particular character, the original version, although perhaps pretty hokey by today's standards, managed to make me care a lot more about each character, and their deaths evoked a lot more sadness than here, where my thought was, oh, well, one more dead guy / gal, even with the famous scene from the original, whereas our intrepid gang has just climbed out of the ballroom and the flood starts. Coming in, I felt something for those who didn't make it here. The way the film was edited, we followed our escapes for about 10 or 15 minutes, forgetting about the ballroom folks, when abruptly we're taken back there just in time to see them all. Killed not nearly as effective as in the first film, where Hackman was looking down at them all with a sense of helplessness because there just wasn't anything he could do. One scene I did find particularly effective was when one of the characters drowns in an effort to save the others. From what I've read elsewhere, it was probably the most realistic and disturbing portrayal of drowning I've ever seen. That one stuck with me for a while at the end. I didn't feel any sense of elation for those rescued, although they seemed to be pretty darn happy about it, and didn't seem to give any thought to those that were left behind or that sacrificed themselves so they might live according to Petersen. Every element of the shot, save the lone figure of Josh Lucas as my professional gambler Dylan Johns limbering up by jogging round the deck, was created in the computer. This should instill every confidence that the movie's signature set piece, the 150 feet killer wave smashing broadside into the Poseidon and rolling it over, will be every bit as awe-inspiring as it needs to be. Got a combination of CG and live action shot from inside and outside the ship, above and below the water level. The sequence is marked by shocking violence as actors and extras are thrown around like rag dolls, only when it comes to an end do you realize you stop breathing. Being an unapologetic disaster flick of the old school Poseidon, does possess all the other salient features that go hand in hand with catastrophe, destruction, and death in the B. Necessary but clumsy expository scenes where we are introduced to the motley crew of survivors to be whose fortunes we will follow once it all goes pear-shaped. The meetings are a little too cute for comfort, and the dialogue is cheesier than a bath full of nacho dip. But thankfully Petersen keeps these encounters brief, giving us only as much information as is required for us to give a toss whether they live or die, with a core group of 10 characters to introduce. This is done with admirable economy, and as is true throughout the movie, when the holiness reaches crisis, point you have to hand it to Petersen for embracing the cliches that are so integral to the disaster movie code, thus fighting for survival as they forge their way up and out of the stricken ship, their number depleted at regular intervals as tradition demands. We have the stoic loner Lucas, the suicidal Gay, the beautiful single mother with the touche-headed kid Jinda, Emma Bennett, the taciturn concerned dad, ex-F fireman and ex-mayor of New York, Kurt Russell, the star-crossed young lovers Emmy Rossum and Mike Vogel, the mysterious stowaway Mia Maestro, and the cocky young waiter Freddie Rodriguez. It's as fine a collection of archetypes as you could wish for, and once the wave hits, there's little time for stirring speeches or sentimental guff in this means business by killing off one of the big names horribly and shockingly in a scene that demonstrates the price of survival almost immediately from the moment the protagonists band together, deciding that their odds are better outside the sealed-off ballroom where the other survivors wait in vain for the rescue helicopters. The action never lets up again. This is a genre that calls for drastic suspension of disbelief. But there are certain moments here that are almost unbearably realistic. One such finds the gang wedged into a ventilator shaft, although not your usual movie ventilator shaft, spotlessly clean and wide enough. To drive a van through this is the real thing. Cramped, dirty, and dark, a hay. Jeb's inducing death trap. Of course, someone gets stuck pinning half of the group below as the water rises and the other up ahead, struggling to unscrew a reluctant grill, as you might expect. It's one of several similar sequences that play heavily on our most primal fears, but nowhere else is the sense of hysterical panic and pure frantic terror evoked with such appreciating intensity. More details, think of Poseidon as sort of the anti-H Titanic, a film it aspires to be, but fails utterly in every conceivable way. There is no great romance, no epic special effects, just a lot of terrible dialogue spoken by wooden actors in a film so CGI dependent. I felt like I was watching a video game. Poseidon is actually a remake of the classic Sevens film, The Poseidon Adventure. That film looks dated by today's standards, but had an emotional gravitas that had you rooting for the characters. This version is so contrived it was obvious in the first 10 minutes what characters would survive. Director Wolf. Gang Petersen, who's made a career of good mega-budget action films, delivers a real clunker this time. The plot, and I use that term loosely, kicks into high gear 5 minutes in a towering wave. Defined as a rogue wave in the film, flips over the gargantuan cruise ship Poseidon in the open sea. Most of the passengers die horrific deaths, but a few lucky ones manage to survive in the overturned boat, ignoring the captain's dot. Andre Bar advice, a small group decides to try to escape out of the ship's propeller shaft. Dylan Josh Lucas is the heroic ex-Navy gambler who takes on the survival of a single mother, Jenda Barrett, and her son, Jimmy Bennett. Kurt Russell is the heroic ex-F firefighter turned ex-New York City mayor, leading his daughter Emmy Rossum and fiancé Mike Vogel to safety. They're joined along the way by the wealthy, flamboyant homosexual Richard Dreyfuss, a stunning stowaway Latina Mia Maestro, and the prerequisite jerk Kevin Dillon. The ragtag group face peril at every corner as they painstakingly inch towards their goal. The characters in this film are completely devoid of exposition or character development. We get bits and pieces of their story over time, but there's really nothing that makes you feel any attachment to them. I read that the inherent urgency of the situation would somehow draw the audience into their plight that doesn't happen whatsoever. I couldn't have cared less who lived or died, because nothing about the characters was endearing. That's a real shame when you have actors like Kurt Russell and Josh Lucas as your lead. Actors, these guys are good. They can play the tough guys and have tremendous depth to their performances. Unfortunately, they're given nothing to work with here, and they end up as caricatures on screen. The biggest disappointment in Poseidon is the dismal special effects. The CGI is so obvious and poorly done. Budget considerations are key here. But what makes Titanic look so good is the fact that they actually built the ship on set. James Cameron was skillfully able to mix in CGI effects with the external set to provide for a highly realistic effect. Poseidon has its fair share of internal sets, but the ship itself is all CGI. It just doesn't look real. You've automatically lost the audience when the pivotal story element is not accepted. Photorealism is key in the world of special effects. The ship looks like it was taken out of an Xbox video game. This is a giant FX-driven retread of the Poseidon adventure from 1972 about the ocean liner that is hit by a freak wave and completely capsizes, leaving passengers no choice but to clamber up from the ceiling of the wreck statum. The chandelier, now a shrunken mound of cracked baubles up to the exposed hull, It was an entertaining film that triggered the 1970s craze for those spectacular disaster movies produced by Irwin Allen, such as The Towering Inferno Earthquake and The Swarm, which addressed the worrying issue of killer bees. Spielberg's Jaws siphoned off a little of this enthusiasm itself, but the new Poseidon, directed by Wolfgang Petersen of Das Boot fame, is too cool to go in for the out-and-out corniness and the multifarious and heartfelt character drama that made those movies so lovable. It also, incidentally, does not feature the ensemble casting of aging Hollywood stars that was de rigueur for the 70s disaster movie, with a row of their faces. In boxes along the bottom of the poster, our hero is Josh Lucas, a star who once played bad guys and is now repositioning himself less plausibly as an action mac. Romantic lead, he plays the professional gambler in the ship casino who proves to have a heart of gold by leading a small group of stout-hearted adventurers, including former fireman Kurt Russell, up to safety in the face of pleas from the captain to remain where they are until help arrives. In the original film, the ethnic subdivision was Jewish typified by the gutsy and likable performance from Shelley Winters. Now this group has been replaced by Latinos. Mia Maestro plays the feisty stowaway, and Freddie Rodriguez from 6 Feet Under is the waiter whose plot function is to provide knowledge of the ship's layout. I'm sorry to say that Poseidon revives the dishonorable tradition of creating one token black in a notionally important job ship's captain. There is also a gay man with a single diamond earring, played by Richard Dreyfuss, the one folk memory link back to the 70s glory days. He has been dumped by his partner and is on the verge of throwing himself overboard when he sees the big wave coming towards him and changes his mind about suicide. I wanted to see much more of this kind of big, brassy, sentimental flourish. So where's the beef? The original Poseidon had a strident, unapologetic message when disaster strikes. Do we strike out for freedom like bold risk-takers and entrepreneurs, or sit back and wait for the authorities to do something that was a real argument the first time around? Not now. It would slow up the all-important action. Kurt Russell's job is to be overprotective of his daughter, played by the glassy-eyed Emmy Rossum, and there are some very yucky lines in which he disapproves of her burgeoning womanly sexuality. Do that top button up, he says, taking offense at her. Day CTO, do you mean it to the twins, taunts Emmy. It's the kind of dialogue that leaves no toe uncurled. The big set pieces are impressive, but there are some outrageously unconvincing moments from the hundreds of tuxed extras who must run around panicking when the big wave first strikes. They do a lot of hammy-amram, bumping into the shattered furniture, almost shouting rhubarb at each other. Their faces are eloquent of people who aren't quite up to the job of emoting. It will be a minor treat to rent the DVD and freeze frame some of the more choice wooden expressions, extra information, whether intentional or not. The original Poseidon. 1972's The Poseidon Adventure was a cheesy, good time, star-studded, and over the top, the film ver invented that CH was going to die next way of thinking that dominates so many of today's films. I'm surprised that a remake has taken this long to surface. No pun intended, but it's here and it wants us to approach it. And the reason it is the second film in as many weeks to be a completely throwaway summer blockbuster. The first 10 minutes introduce us to the group we're supposed to care about. We have Dylan Lucas, a former Navy man turned gambler, Robert Russell, a well-to-do former New York City mayor and firefighter, Jennifer Rossum, Robert's daughter, who is involved with boyfriend Christian against Robert's wishes, of course. Nelson Dreyfuss, a suicidal eccentric, Elena Mia Maestro, a stowaway, and finally Mother Maggie, Jinda Barrett, and son Connor Jimmy Bennett as our. Everyone knows by now, a rogue wave strikes the boat, turning it upside down and leaving our beloved bunch to find their way to safety, while the film is successful in building tension and dread in several scenes. This is a largely predictable and unintentionally hilarious. A fair director, Wolfgang Petersen, has taken a Final Destination risque approach to all of the climactic death scenes, which resulted in gales of laughter at the screening I attended. That nearly every death leads to inevitable life lesson dialogue leads me to believe that the film actually wants to have something to say, but no one signed up for that. The age-old death sentence formula is in full effect. It doesn't matter how moronic you are, if you're white, you live. Why is this still an acceptable way to craft a screenplay? Petersen has made a fortune making let's see, special effects-laden pictures, and he recycles many tricks from A Perfect Storm and Dawes Boot here. The opening boat sequence is a humdinger. But after that, nearly entire film is set in claustrophobic locales within frequent, often phony-looking exterior eye or shots, popping up here and there. How could this film have cost $140 million to make it? Must have been the cast, who are all interchangeable, to say the least. Kurt Russell does the thankless aging hero. Shtick! While Emmy Rossum, who is far too talented for the stale role, stands around and looks really worried while being doused with lukewarm water. Richard Dreyfuss is the only one who brings some depth and feeling to his role. And what about Kevin Dillon, Matt Dillon's brother? This has to be the first time I have convincingly seen a man be the perfect poor man's version of his own brother. Poseidon is not a horrible film, but it's time for Hollywood to wise up and face the fact that people demand more these days than ho-hum special effects. Incoherent noise and mannequin characters. There are a few thrills and laughs to be had, but that's the extent of it. I shudder to think that this in Mission Impossible 3 is an accurate representation of what Atlantic individual survivors Josh Lucas, Kurt Russell, Jynda Barrett band together and traverse a hazardous upside-down maze that they hope will take them to safety as the wrecked vessel fills with water. The survivors must call on hidden strengths and skills to face the fight of their lives. Believe it or not, I had never bothered to watch Poseidon until this past weekend. I always loved the Poseidon adventure starring Gene Hat P-Man, so I didn't see the point in this remake. I'm glad I did eventually sit down and give it a chance, as it's a fun disaster. Movie with a decent cast that includes the always reliable Kurt Russell as well as Josh Lucas, Richard Dreyfuss, and Emmy Rossum. Poseidon is directed by Wolfgang Petersen, who I consider rather underrated, as he also helmed classic films like Dawes Boot and The Line of Fire, The Never-Ending Story, and even Air Force One, which I find a guilty pleasure. He knows how to do a set piece, and POS isn't short of spectacle. It's around 98 minutes long, so it doesn't get too bogged down with silly things like characterization or realistic dialogue. It gives us the usual cardboard cutouts who we tick off until they meet their eventual unpleasant demises. However, I did find I liked the cast and wanted them to survive, which is rare in these kinds of movies. The only character you are made to hate is Kevin Dillon's jerkish Lucky Larry, who isn't quite as fortunate as he thinks he is, but the rest of the cast are surprisingly sympathetic. The capsizing sequence is for the most part impressively done and manages to create a suitably hellish scenario where our band of survivors try to make it to the bottom of the ship, which is now the top, and find safety. Not everyone will make it, of course. And spoiler alert, it bothered me greatly that Kurt Russell had to sacrifice himself for the greater good. But it was a hero's death. It was very well done. And I don't know how they actually made it look so convincing, as it was genuinely upsetting to watch. I thought the meanest death was poor Valentine, who falls and gets impaled, which he really didn't deserve. But it certainly guarantees you are emotionally engaged. The kid Connor, Jimmy Bennett, was quite the hero, but I still don't understand how he ended up separated from his mother in that stupid cage. There is some CG, especially the explosions, but the effects mostly hold up, and I've seen a lot worse. The pacing keeps things relatively tense, and the ventilation shaft scene is the stuff of nightmares. It's tough to sit through, as it's one of the most desperate moments of the film. Overall, Poseidon may not reinvent the disaster genre, but it's a fun ride with several harrowing moments. and regular explosions. The casts do their best with the rather one-note characters, but they are at least mostly sympathetic, and Kurt Russell automatically makes any movie better. This film directed by Wolfgang Petersen. Screenplay by Mark Protosevich, produced by Wolfgang Petersen, Duncan, Henderson. Mike F.L. a.k.a. Goldsman, starring Kurt Russ, Josh Lucas, Richard Dees, Emmy Rossum, Jinda, Barrett, M.C. Vogel, Mia Maestro, Jimmy Bennett, Andre B.R. Cinematography, John, edited by Peter Hones. Music by Klaus Badel, production companies Virtual Studios, Owen Allen Productions, Next Entertainment, Radiant Productions. Synthesis Entertainment, distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures. Release dates May 6, 2006 in TCA, May 12, 2006 in United States. Running time 98 minutes, country United States, language English, budget $160 million, box office $81.7 million. So guys, this is the review of Poseidon movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.